Hello and welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo. Our main focus for today is the state of politics in Nigeria and how that impacts the polity. We're joined by lawyer, scholar, poet, rights activist and public affairs commentator, Dr. Ugaga Ifowodo, and he will be speaking to emerging issues on the current state of play and politics in Nigeria. Next, we discuss local government administration structure and systemic challenges impeding progress and development at that level with Professor Fred Eze, Professor of Public Administration and the Director of Studies, Enugu State University of Technology Business School there in Enugu.
Whatever the issues are,
the National Assembly is constitutionally empowered to scrutinize,
however complex or intricate.
We have involved all the academia, the members of the academia. We have involved the academies.
Be it government policies or in fact any issue of public concern.
Our job is to help you gain clarity and make sense of it all.
This is not really healthy for our democracy.
There's a lot of aggrievance in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of the state.
It's also in the quality of food being consumed.
After all, perception is insight.
And gaining understanding is also getting insight.
With the next election cycle already casting a long shadow, questions about governance, opposition viability, and the very fabric of our federation has been paramount. They've been out there, but requiring answers now more than, ever before. To help us unpack some of these complex issues, we're joined by lawyer, scholar, poet, rights activist, and public affairs commentator, Dr. Ugaga Ifowodo. Doc, too many titles, I don't know, but what it means to me is that you're suitably qualified for this conversation. I'd like to welcome you to Insights. I know we've been chasing after you for a while to have you here on the program. So I feel quite delighted to have you on the program this day. Thank you so much for coming in.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you for having me back.
Good to have you. Doc, I'd like for you to begin by appraising the rather rising public perception on the current state or current issue of politics over policy, or maybe it's better described as politics over governance. This is against the shadow of the 2027 national elections. And yes, I know there are ongoing conversations in the public domain on how the economy has moved from point A to point B, on how we're boosting infrastructure across, the federation and agriculture and all the achievements that have been made. Yet, it does seem, even at this point, like the 2027 elections dominate all else. So the prevailing perception is that governance is being held captive by early maneuverings for the 2027 presidential election, hence the preponderance of premature campaigns, which in itself, and Doc, you would agree with me, INEC just a couple of weeks back talked about that as a challenge, as a problem. Let me take advantage of your expertise in law and political analysis and ask you a direct question. Do you consider all of these issues, absolutely normal, to have such level of high-level maneuvering 2 years before even the first vote is cast in 2027? Or are we seeing the definitive triumph of politics over policy?
I think it's normal. If we are dealing within the liberal democratic system of government, which has periodic elections, especially periodic elections that have a 4-year cycle. 4 years might seem to be a long time, but it's a very short time, actually. And there's always politics. It's always a matter of more or less. And the intensity of it depends on what specific issue is at stake at the moment. So if, for instance, the issue is elections are coming up, and candidates are already campaigning in the primaries, parties are already trying to choose their flag bearers, that becomes the particular slant on the politics of the day. At other intervals, it will be a question of one government policy or the other. And because the opposition is looking to exploit every possible weakness, every possible loophole, and even when there is none, make it look as if there is to their own advantage and it's no fault of theirs, That's what opposition parties do. It always seems to look as if politics is dominating the scene and crowding out every other thing. But the truth is, policy and politics are interrelated. Governance and politics are one and the same thing in that sense. So we always have to pay attention to the specific issue. So maybe as we go along, when we get to specific issues,
I wanted us to deal with this issue completely so we can move on to other issues. In fact, you already made allusions to the quality of opposition, and so I will be talking about that. But let me take you back to the same issue of, premature campaigns, and, you said it's normal. Well, a lot of people might agree with you on that stance. Those on the other side might say, no, it's not. There are laws. We do actually have laws, and these laws are specific, even though some persons have said that, look, there are loopholes and lacunas in our existing laws, and that's where all of that. What do you define as premature campaigns, for instance? Can you say a government in power cannot tout or laud some achievements it's made? And of course, you talked about opposition also, criticizing just about anything the government in power, the ruling party, does. So what then, do you then say it's normal, even in the presence of existing laws?
Well, it's a fine line. That's the point I'm trying to make. It's a fine line, because every act of a government in power can be interpreted to mean a campaign, and every act of the opposition party can also be interpreted to mean a campaign. One is trying to show that the other is not doing a good job, and therefore we are in a better position, to govern better. Okay, that's one. The other one say we're already doing a good job in the light of the circumstances, the problems, the encumbrances that we encountered, and this are what we are doing. So it's a question of perspective at that point. That's why I say we have to look at specific issues. Have electoral politics begun in the sense of active campaigning? If INEC, for instance, as we are speaking now, the voter re-registration exercise is going on, and parties are mobilizing to have more people registered into their parties, is that campaigning? And if so, does that not affect all the political parties who must necessarily be involved in the act of mobilizing, recruiting new members into their parties, and ensuring that those who are already members, who for any reason may have problems with identification, whatever the problem might be, change of address, they've relocated, they want to change their voting unit, all of that is part of politics. Yes. So again, it's the specific issue at stake that we can zero in on and see what the current government's position is on it and what the opposition is saying. And then we can say, is this some kind of unwholesome campaigning, or is this just the opposition doing what opposition does to cast everything that the government in power does in a negative light?
Right. So it's quite a delicate line, like you've said, and it will take some careful treading to walk the line. In terms of a government in power, Doc, I would like for you to also speak to that. How delicately balanced, or how delicate is it for a ruling party in power to also walk this line, this fine line that you've talked about between balancing governance and politics, especially as the elections approach?
It's delicate only to the extent that it knows that every of its steps is going to be scrutinized by the opposition. So it has to be mindful of the fact of its actions being misread and cast in a light different from what is intended, and probably also different from what it is achieving on the ground. But at the same time, a government that is too mindful of that can easily, cripple itself. The only thing it has to be sure of is what it wants to do. Is this in the interest of the people? Is this part of what we campaigned on as a mandate, what we want to do? And therefore, we have a mandate to do it. And are they sincere? If they are not being deliberately misleading, self-serving, then I think they should worry very little about how the opposition is going to see it, because the opposition will necessarily see it in a different light than that in which it conceived it. Maybe just to bring it home,
Yes.
Take the removal of fuel subsidy, which has led, and also not just removal of fuel subsidy, or the closing of the foreign exchange markets in order to stop artificially propping up the value of the naira, defending it against the foreign currencies, even at the risk, dare risk our economy, of the central bank printing money to do so under the so-called Ways and Means Committee. So now, all the major political parties, at least the three major political parties in the last general election, their candidates said they were committed to removing the subsidies, fuel subsidies, and restoring the value of the naira. So now, taking subsidy alone, the current government removed it and removed all the distortions that came along with it, some of which we are beginning to see now as Dangote keeps crying out about the so-called cabal that is insistent on holding the petroleum sector, to ransom, Nigerians to ransom. So the question to ask is, if the opposition is critical of the current government, and say because that policy has brought hardship, has led to a sharp decline in the value of the naira, and therefore there's hunger in the land as food items and necessities have gone out of the reach of the ordinary Nigerian. The question would be, what would the opposition have done differently? Is the opposition therefore saying that if they were in power, they would have kept the subsidies, or that if they are voted into power, they will restore the subsidies? And if they will restore the subsidies, how do they hope to find the monies to keep government running, first of all, and then two, to prop up the value of the naira?
And when you lay all of these out, Doc, and earlier on you talked about the opposition, and I felt, okay, Doc is talking about the opposition in an idyllic sense, what should be ideally. So let's talk about the quality of opposition in Nigeria, and and this presumptive, one-party shift that is much talked about everywhere. It will seem right now, and a lot of people have said that the opposition currently in Nigeria is in disarray. Most of the bigger parties, the dominant, well, let me say the bigger parties, and even the smaller ones, are seemingly engaged right now in internal wranglings, which they also accuse the ruling APC of sponsoring. This development has spawned what appears to be the opposition's inability to present a coherent alternative, like not the kind of alternative that the scenario that you've just painted. So, Doc, are we seeing, or rather, I know, yes, we are seeing movements, we see people move from one party to another, defections, realignment, what we call political cross-carpeting. It's even more dominant now than ever before. My question to you, Doc, with the APC controlling the federal parastatals and most states, as it would seem right now, are we witnessing the organic, if not alarming, emergence of a de facto one-party state indeed? Or does the failure of the opposition lie in their own structural weaknesses? Is there some conscious strategy by the APC to co-opt, perhaps even lure and entice bigwigs from other parties into its own fold before the 2027 elections? Is that what we're seeing play out, in the polity right now?
I think you partially touched on what the real problem is. The opposition trying to blame its weaknesses on the party in power. We've had this talk about one party, or the drift to one party state. It didn't even start with APC. APC was not even in existence. At the time, PDP was boasting of being the largest party in Africa, and that they would be in governance for 60 years.
60 or 70? 60, I think.
Well, we can take 60 as a baseline.
Yes.
We can take 60 as a baseline. So at the time they were boasting of that, APC was not even in existence. Again, this crying wolf, it's bothersome. I would like our opposition party, because no democracy can thrive without a viable opposition.
Yes.
I've always held fast to that. And I've always given the instance of a parliamentary system, which I still advocate for Nigeria, being cheaper, less expensive to run, and having numerous advantages, in my view, more than the parliamentary system in a multi-ethnic society like ours. But that's a different subject for another day. But there's no danger, in my view, of Nigeria drifting into a one-party dictatorship. First reason is because Nigeria is too big and complex. The various ethnic groups, the various social groups, cultural, religious groups, and their interests are clashing almost all the time, mostly because of the interests of the elites that dominate them, not necessarily because of the ordinary people, actually, cannot coexist with each other. But being that as it may, the idea that one day, at least in the foreseeable future, as things are right now, Nigeria will drift into a one-party state, I think is far-fetched. It's just politicians scaremongering and trying to blame their weaknesses on the party in power. After all, it is the elite, it is the leaders of this party who have been in every political party. The case of Atiku Abubakar, for instance, is the most famous. It's been literally all the parties since 1999. So who is going to be the one causing this drift into a one-party state when they are the ones who never stayed true to their parties?
To what extent does the party in power, the ruling party, share in the responsibility of fostering a viable opposition in a democracy?
It is not the interest, and it shouldn't be the primary task of the party in power to do things to create opposition for itself or to strengthen opposition against itself. It isn't. It is the business of the opposition
to what
itself.
extent does it allow opposition to try to,
Of course, the laws are there. For instance, if the government in power is clamping down on opposition, preventing them from exercising a constitutional right to freedom of association, because we may, no matter how we see political parties enjoying a larger than life, almost like a natural status, they are actually associations that are formed by people of like minds. They are no different in essence in the right that enables them to come together as from the right that enables all students to come together and form an all students association or a market tomato sellers association. So it's freedom of association. That's what enables political parties to come together. They say, we believe that this is the way we can run our country for the better interest of everybody and vote for us because of that reason. So they come together to work towards that goal. So if the government in power is preventing freedom of association, peaceable assembly, and then the freedom of expression, because all of these are intertwined, freedom of movement, then we can hold the government responsible. We can at that point, they can even go to court to challenge that. But to just glibly say the government in power is taking our members from us, who's taking them? I mean, they have the right to stay or not to stay. And they've been exercising that right again since 1999, moving from one party to the other, and then they will come back again to the same parties and go leave it again, go to another one. So I think it is just crying wolf.
There's also the issue of no clearly defined ideology, amongst our parties or, between the parties, so that it makes jumping from one party to another easy in Nigeria. Our parties are not ideologically based. And so there are no clear distinctions between, say, PDP's stands on education, for instance, and APC's stand opposition on education, for instance. Our ideologies or party political ideologies do not vary from issues to issues as far as politics is concerned in Nigeria. Is that also part of the challenge here, Doc?
I don't think that's as much a problem as a fact of individual selfish interest. Because when you read their platforms, they actually wax very often quite lyrical on the good things that we want. If you look at the fundamental principle and directive principle of state part of the Constitution and look at their platforms, you can say, oh, this is beautiful. It is really the selfish interest. Take the classic example. After all, we supposedly model our democracy after the United States, presidential system, which I think we have copied, word for word, literally, quote and unquote, to our own detriment, But there was a time, many people would say there is no difference between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party. In fact, I remember some time back when Obama and Hillary were on the cusp of becoming...
I would think they are clearly defined. Take immigration, for instance.
Oh, no, but let me land.
Okay.
What I'm trying to say is that at the end of the day, when you scrutinize and go beyond the policies of the day-by-day policies of government, one president or the other, basically, there are platforms. There's really nothing that is anti-liberal democracy.
Oh,
you know.
true.
So, for instance, you cannot say the Democratic Party is a democratic socialist party or a Marxist party. No, they are all still rooted in the liberal democratic system of governance.
True.
So the differences in policies like immigration are a matter of more or less. In fact, Joe Biden is reputed to have actually deported more as quote unquote illegal aliens than even Trump in his first tenure. So we have to be careful to really scrutinize these policies and then know that at the end of the day, it's not because there's lack of ideological difference, but the interest, that will to power, that desire to be the ones governing, to be the ones in power, not to be left out of the political, power structure, so that you are far from the divvying up of the resources of the land, the access to political power, influence, appointments, and so on. That is what drives them more than any ideological commitment to Nigeria.
Doc, let me quickly move you on to Rivers State. I mean, that's yet another topical issue. The political situation in that state appears to have de-escalated, but some persons still criticize the process, describing the current state of affairs, as a piece of the graveyard. I'm not saying that's the piece that comes before I'm just saying what people are saying. But they say the process that led to where we are right now in Rivers State is a fragile elite-backed truce that bypassed the people entirely. In your opinion, what specific measurable targets do you think the people of Rivers State should, at this point, demand from the Fubara administration to ensure that this peace, this peace that we're talking about translates into tangible democratic dividends and not just the quiet consolidation of a new political machine?
I may be simplistic about it,
please,
but to me, it is between Fubara and Wike. That's where the crisis started. That's where it will end. I read recently that Wike says the problem has ended. He and Fubara are back, to being on the same page. I hope it remains so. And if it remains so, peace will return. The people at the grassroots always take the cue from their leaders because they owe allegiance to them. So if the leaders are saying we want peace, we bury the hatchet, well, then I think there will be peace. Let me just leave it at that as a way of picking at the basic minimum.
Fantastic. So now I'm moving on to yet another germane issue, the question on Nigeria's democratic evolution and how certain socio-economic development continue to test our resilience as a democracy. Today, we're contending with issues like, secessionist agitations in the southeast, insecurity across the country, and the troubling cost of living crisis that we have. Even now, I hear people asking the question whether, as a country and as a people, we're nearing a breaking point. Doc, time and again, history teaches us that, a nation is perpetually a work in progress. Ours is a work in progress. Most democracies are. But based on your critical observations of some of the things you've seen, is this current phase that we are a predictable, albeit painful, part of our democratic evolution towards a more united democracy? Do things have to get really bad before it eventually begins to get better? When do we turn the curve?
If you follow history, then you have to say yes, that things have to get bad before they get better. Because who was the philosopher that said, I don't know if it's Benjamin Franklin, scholar, intellectual, that said every civilization is a document of barbarism, No, not what Benjamin Franklin. Walter Benjamin, I meant to say, I beg your pardon. Okay. That every civilization is a document of barbarism. When you look at it, pare away all the shine that you see today, all the rights that we take for granted today, and then look at how those rights were achieved, then you realize that so much struggle, so much blood, so much suffering had passed before we got there. Now, do we necessarily have to repeat the past? Can't we learn from the mistakes of the past and have a less painful way to what we want? That is the question to be answered. But as long as we have the problems here and we know the causes, the question would be, can we tackle them honestly and sincerely without the country falling apart first? My answer is that we can.
Okay.
My answer is that the fact that Nigeria has even stayed together for as long as it has, when it was thrown right into a crisis of being one or divided just 6 years after independence, means that we have passed the biggest test, and no test that is going to come our way now is going to undo us unless we ourselves willingly want it, to undo us. But I think the easiest way to also avoid a lot of those problems is to hit the call that the opposition, the genuine left in Nigeria, has been making for a long time, which is, after colonialism, Nigeria by now ought to have sat down to decide for itself a proper, true, genuine and representative constitution of the people, made by the people. So we agree that this is what we want our country to be. These will be the relations between the constituent parts, but not to just, kind of lackadaisically think that things are going to be all right. Why haven't we had a sovereign national conference until now? As much as people might criticize President Bola Ahmed Tinubu today, is the one actually who's done a few things.
It seems as though, Doc, you're not satisfied with the amendments that have been made to the Constitution. Are you saying you'd rather prefer a complete overhaul of the entire Constitution?
No, in fact, that's where I was going. That there are two ways. Either we have a complete overhaul, have a brand new Constitution for all, which is my preferred way. Okay. It's preferred for any nation. What can be better than, after every constitution starts by we the people, right? So what better way to say it is we the people than to actually bring the elected, freely and democratically elected representatives of the people together to then decide on what we want. But if that is proving too difficult for any number of socio-political reasons now, what can we do in the alternative? And this is where I'm going to praise President Bola Ahmed Tinubu, because at least two of the things he's done so far. First one, autonomy to the local governments. It's one of the things that ought to have been done long ago. People might quarrel or quibble about how he did it, whether the judicial going to court over it to do it was the best way, whether the court gave the right decision. But what we know is that the goal has always been autonomy for the local governments. He achieved that. Secondly, the exclusive legislative list and some of the items on it, including power generation. Power is one of the biggest problems that Nigeria has. To centralize power in a country that can hardly generate enough electricity to even turn on the lights in homes, let alone manufacturing and industry, to now take it from the exclusive legislative list and allow states to generate their power. It's already beginning to nibble from the corners, if you like, are those things that we would do at a sovereign national conference to give true meaning to self-determination, true governance, and empowering the federative units more than the center. So if before the end of his tenure he does even a little more of this, we will be inching our way closer. But if you ask me, the preference is let the people come together in a conclave, in a conference, and decide a new constitution for themselves.
Doc, I hear you and I hear you clearly. Unfortunately, we're out of time. There are a lot more issues I wanted us to take up on. I wanted us to talk about the resilience of the youth of Nigeria and how they could, using the social media, of course, transform Nigeria's political landscape. And of course, there's also the issue of the 2027 elections. Yes, the elections are not here. We've not even cast the first vote, but now we see what is in play. But I guess we'll have to take that up next time when you come on the program. For now, we'll just draw the curtain here, and I'd like to thank you so much, lawyer, scholar, poet, rights activist, and public affairs analyst, Dr. Ogaga Ifowodo. Thank you so much for your thoughts on all of the issues that we've laid out, quite germane, quite profound. Thank you so much for coming on the program. Hope we'll see you back here on Insight sometime real soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me. I'll be back whenever you want me.